Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I'm going to tell you about a smug neighbor whose name is definitely Karen. I recall throwing myself a long overdue birthday party on my own land. I woke up energized and thought, this year, I'm not going to let my birthday pass quietly. I'm doing something special. I spent months restoring my old farmhouse, painting fences, and fixing the barn. My family had owned the land for generations, and I was proud to inherit it. It was difficult, but I felt obligated to my family's legacy and myself. However, I rarely hosted large social gatherings, so this was an experiment, especially since I stay to myself most of the year. However, I have some good neighbors, so I thought it would be nice to invite a few over for a casual birthday party. No big deal, but I wanted good company, a barbecue, and a chance to enjoy my property with friends. I didn't expect that ending. I have many acres of land. My farmhouse is reached by a winding gravel driveway from the main country road, past maple trees. An old orchard is beyond my barn on the left. The orchard hasn't been in full production for years, but a few apple and pear trees produce enough fruit in autumn. I spend most of my free time gardening, removing overgrown shrubs, and preventing a jungle. Though peaceful, there's always work. Despite the rural setting, I have neighbors, some nearby, some farther out. Although our area is sparsely populated, we all know each other by name. Because I was raised to have good relationships with everyone, I always tried to. You assist a neighbor with a broken fence post. In a big storm, ask if they need help clearing the driveway. I was raised with neighborliness. Not everyone reciprocates. Karen, my neighbor, taught me that painfully. That's not her real name, but I'll use it for this story. Karen joined our community 3 years ago. She bought a small property near mine, and I tried to be welcoming. I brought her some strawberries from my patch the day she moved in to say hello and offer hospitality. Even after she thanked me, I could tell she was entitled in every sentence. She said, "It's about time somebody came to greet me," and "I can't believe how quiet this place is. I hope things improve soon." I shrugged, blaming moving stress. I didn't realize that was just the beginning. Karen caused mild neighborhood unrest in subsequent months. Deer were too noisy in the morning, she complained. If someone cut their lawn early, she called the county office to check noise ordinances. She also seemed to have strong opinions about how others maintained their property. She would notify a yard owner if it wasn't weeded to her standards. Sometimes it was hard to ignore her. We met at the feed store and while jogging on the main road, but I tried to minimize our interactions. She complained about something community-related each time. Fast forward to my birthday party. I planned a small group of neighbors and close friends. I invited my longtime neighbor, Michael. If needed, Michael will lend you his tractor. He's laid back and funny. I appreciate his honesty and community, even though we're not best friends. 2 nearby residents were also invited. I sent out informal invitations 2 weeks before the event, describing it as an outdoor barbecue, music, and possibly a bonfire if the weather held. Response was positive. Most said they'd like to come or say hi. Despite rarely hosting parties, I decided to go all out with good food, yard decor, and lawn games. My guest list did not include Karen. There was no specific incident that excluded her. I disagreed with her, but I didn't invite the neighborhood, was picky. The only reason I invited Michael was because we'd helped each other with our properties over the years and had many friendly conversations. I didn't invite him over Karen to make a point. Karen wasn't close enough for me to want her there. Additionally, I feared she would cause a scene. My big day was supposed to be a fun time with friends, not a drama fest. Karen was informed that Michael and others were invited to my party. She may have heard it from store chatter or a neighbor who mentioned they were excited for the gathering. However, Karen confronted me on my driveway days before the party. Her car slowly pulled up while I was trimming a hedge. She paraded up to me with her arms folded across her chest and asked, "Are you having a party soon?" I smiled politely and said, "Yes, I am, just a small birthday get-together." She raised an eyebrow and said, "I heard you invited Michael." I sensed the conversation was going poorly, but I stayed calm. "Yes, Michael's coming," I said. Karen pouted and asked, "Did I miss my invitation in the mail? Or are you against me?" Her tone wasn't friendly. I said, "It's a small gathering with close friends," to be diplomatic. Karen was unsatisfied with my explanation. She refused to move and lectured me on neighborliness. She concluded, "If you call one neighbor, you must call all neighbors. All residents are equal. How am I worse than my neighbors?" I didn't like her telling me who to invite to a private party on my property. However, I did not argue. I said, "I'm sorry, Karen, but I've already finalized the invitation list. Not a community event, it's just a birthday party." She looked at me incredulously, then turned and left without saying a word. I breathed a sigh of relief when her car was gone, hoping she would accept and not show up uninvited. My party was on a beautiful, mild afternoon. I placed food on tables near the barn and played light music. A few friends and neighbors, including Michael, arrived, and everyone seemed happy. We chatted, played horseshoes, and ate delicious grilled chicken. I was glad. I enjoyed watching people on my property laugh, share stories, and let the day unfold. I planned a small bonfire behind the barn on a cleared gravel patch for safe fires at sunset. As evening turned to golden hour, Karen's car drove down the gravel driveway. My stomach sank. She left dressed as if she wanted to join the festivities, carrying a small purse and smiling with forced politeness. She walked right to my group, ignoring our amazed looks. I approached her cautiously and kept my tone steady. "Karen, I didn't see you coming. I decided to show up for this private event." She smiled too big to be genuine and said, "We're neighbors." I wanted to avoid a scene with my guests. However, I felt entitled to ask her to leave. It was my birthday, property, and invitation list. I apologized and told her she wasn't on the guest list and needed to leave. "Karen, I'm asking you to leave now. Please respect my request." She tilted her head, offended, and said something that froze everyone. She said, "You called Michael and not me, and I still don't understand what makes me worse than you. This is my and your neighborhood." Before I could respond, she took out her phone. I half expected her to film the fight, but she called 911. She said, "I'm calling the police," in front of us. She shocked me by illegally ejecting me from a neighborhood event. Some guests looked shocked. I spoke, but she turned away, phone to ear. She told the dispatcher that she was being evicted from her neighborhood land and had every right to be there. She implied we were conspiring against her, which was not the case. Michael shook his head when I whispered, "I can't believe she's doing this." "She's out of line," he whispered. I overheard Karen talking. She told the dispatcher we were engaging in unauthorized exclusion, a non-legal term, and that she was worried for her safety. What I heard was unbelievable. My other guests looked uneasy. Some asked to leave. I replied, "No, this is my property. Nothing is wrong here." Karen ended the call. She triumphantly returned to us and said, "Well, if you're calling Michael, call me too." She added, "Just wait until the police get here." She crossed her arms and glared at me as I prepared to speak. I had nothing to hide and was willing to wait for the police. As a landowner, I could refuse Karen entry. We stood awkwardly silent for a while. Tension was high. Karen became nervous as if a switch flipped in her mind. She looked down the driveway toward the main road and said, "They're going to be here any minute." Then she panicked. She seemed to realize that telling the police she was excluded from a private birthday party might not work. Calling 911 for a non-emergency could have legal consequences if the dispatcher or responding officer thought she wasted their time. Perhaps that realization hit her. Without speaking, she got back in her car and drove down my driveway, leaving a thick dust cloud. Michael whistled softly. "She fled," he said, shaking his head. A couple of guests suggested canceling the rest of the party. I said, "No, we were fine." We returned to the fire pit, lit the bonfire, and tried to relax. If the police arrived, we would explain everything. A single squad car entered the driveway 10-15 minutes later. The calm deputy exited, looked around, and approached me. I told Karen it was my private birthday party. She was upset she wasn't invited, called 911, and ran away. The deputy thanked me for explaining and apologized for interrupting. He said he received a hostile situation call, but saw no immediate threat. In fact, he entered a small group of people enjoying a mild evening outdoors. I asked if Karen could be prosecuted for calling 911 falsely. He said he'd file his report and proceed. If it's a genuine misunderstanding or the dispatcher doesn't press the issue, it may not go anywhere. Karen could be fined for a frivolous or false call. Anyway, I told him my story. After the deputy left, my guests and I tried to celebrate. Despite dampening the atmosphere, the night was salvageable. We shared stories and roasted marshmallows before leaving at midnight. It wasn't the carefree birthday party I wanted, but it ended without a fight. You might think that's it. Unfortunately, Karen's antics were just beginning. Okay, let me add another layer to the story that started before my birthday. A few months earlier, I found Karen's fence on my land. I discovered this when I hired a surveyor to check the boundary lines before building a fence. Before expanding my garden, I wanted to make sure I wasn't encroaching on anyone's property. Karen's fence was 3 feet over the property line, according to the surveyor. It was annoying, but I would ignore it if it didn't affect my plans. I politely asked Karen about the fence. She ignored the survey results and assumed I hired an incompetent. She became defensive and claimed the land when I tried to negotiate. She refused to see official maps. I gave up because I didn't have the energy to fight her over a fence overlap. I planned to revisit it later or work around the overlap if it wasn't too disruptive. The effort seemed pointless. After the birthday fiasco, I changed my mind. If she was going to cause trouble on my property, refuse to leave my private gathering, and call 911 uselessly, I might need to assert my rights. The local sheriff called me a week after the party. The deputy I spoke with at the party said the 911 report was being reviewed. He explained that Karen had made some minor complaints to them. It was unlikely she would receive a large fine for misuse of emergency services, but the district attorney could cite or fine her. I offered to help the deputy in any way. He thanked me and promised to contact me if he needed more info. Karen quieted down. I saw her car less and heard from a neighbor that she was fuming about the party. She told people I singled her out for no reason. It was ridiculous, but I kept quiet. I suspected her 911 call would haunt her in court. I didn't want more drama, so I focused on my daily life. I had property chores, repairs, and a backlog of party prep tasks. The Karen incident was the last thing I wanted to think about. Fate had other ideas. I noticed fresh paint on a corner post on my fence line behind the orchard, which I rarely visit, one afternoon 2 weeks after my party. That was odd because I hadn't painted that fence in a while. The old wooden fence was mostly decorative, not the main boundary. I was curious, so I went out there and found a bright yellow sign that read "Private Property, No Trespassing," hammered onto my fence. But the boundary was my orchard. After checking the property markers, I realized Karen had put up this sign. This escalated her fence dispute. She appeared to be claiming more land than the 3-foot overlap. The audacity shocked me. She barged onto my property while I was at work. I do remote consulting and occasional in-person business. Hammered a sign onto my fence and tried to claim it. This was now trespassing and vandalism, not just a boundary dispute. The sign, fence, and survey markers' property lines were photographed. In case I needed proof, I carefully removed her sign from my fence and stored it in my barn. I drove to Karen's house that night to talk calmly. I didn't want to escalate, but I didn't want her to think she could do whatever she wanted on my land. Knocked on her door. With a curdling look, she answered. "Why are you on my porch?" she demanded before I could say hello. I said, "We need to talk about the sign you put up on my fence." She tried to stop me. "It's my fence," I calmly said. "I have survey markers and official documents indicating the fence is on my property. Entering my land to put up signs is prohibited," she replied. "Those documents are fraudulent. Even if that fence was yours, you let me put mine where I wanted. Now you're making an issue because you're upset about the party," she said harshly, rewriting history. I had complained about the fence encroachment months earlier, but she ignored me. Now she doubled down. I told her I removed the sign and would call the police if she kept trespassing on my land. She slammed the door without saying a word. Her 911 stunt made me not want to let things slide again. The next morning, I visited the county records office. I requested the latest land survey and property records for my and Karen's land. I also met with a local property lawyer to clarify my rights. The lawyer was straightforward. If her fence is on your land and she refuses to move it, you could sue or negotiate. Given her behavior, a negotiation might not work. I didn't like litigation, but I would do it to protect my property rights. The attorney advised sending a formal notice to remove or realign the fence. Karen's refusal would lead to further action. Karen's 911 call aftermath caught up with her. A week later, the sheriff called again. This time, it was to confirm Karen's emergency service misuse citation. Although minor, the penalty made a point. I assumed that after reviewing her call audio and speaking with the deputy who responded, the authorities determined that her claim was false and there was no emergency. The deputy told me she was very upset when she learned about the citation, but rules are rules. Offended that someone won't let you into their private party? Don't call 911. Karen's fine was quietly announced in the neighborhood. In our small grapevine, word spread that she misused 911. Karen was increasingly shunned. She felt like she was losing credibility. Instead of fixing relationships, she grew angrier, especially toward me. One neighbor claimed I had brainwashed the authorities. Everything was ridiculous. She was drowning in negativity. and I knew she would realize that lash out at everyone was pointless. I sent Karen a formal letter through my attorney requesting that her fence be removed from my land. I gave her a reasonable 30-day deadline from the letter date to remove or relocate the fence. Unless she complied, I would remove it. The letter also stated that I could sue if she trespassed again. I didn't want to be extreme, but she had to stop violating my rights. Her attorney contacted me 2 weeks after sending the letter, saying she would review the matter but that Karen was disputing the property line. My attorney cited the county survey. Karen could do her own survey, but the official survey would stand until then. While this legal dance was happening, a different situation gave me an edge. The county planned to repave a small road near our properties. They installed new boundary markers and verified the official lines on each parcel near the road. My survey stakes were matched by new stakes on my property. The local government added another layer of verification. Karen's fence was clearly trespassing on my land. I waited for Karen to remove the fence properly. She did nothing during the 30-day deadline. I followed up and threatened to remove the fence if she didn't comply within 2 weeks. After the deadline, I rented equipment and carefully dismantled the fence beyond my property line with a handyman friend. We neatly placed the materials on Karen's side of the boundary for her to retrieve. To be safe in case Karen accused us of wrongdoing, we took photos and videos throughout. Karen arrived as if planned when she heard the commotion. She charged toward us, shouting, "What are you doing to my fence?" "I'm removing the parts on my property," I told her calmly. She threatened to call the police again because you ignored a deadline to do it yourself. I said, "You can do that, but I have legal documents and correspondences that prove I'm within my rights." She seemed hesitant, likely remembering her $911 fine. She stood fuming as we dismantled the fence. Although she filmed us with her phone for evidence, I doubt it helped her cause. After we finished, I said, "Your fence materials are there." She looked at me with daggers but didn't cross the boundary. In the days that followed, Karen was unusually quiet. She probably realized that bullying me had only gotten her a fine and a broken fence. Meanwhile, I continued. I planted a row of bushes in the newly freed space to mark the boundary and give myself more privacy from Karen. Some neighbors helped me dig and plant, partly to support me after all the nonsense. One friend joked, "At least you got a little extra landscaping project out of this ordeal." We laughed. I later learned from a neighbor that Karen had complained to the homeowners association. Our rural area has no formal homeowners association, which is odd. A loose community group that occasionally discusses road maintenance or organizes yard sales. Power and enforcement are absent. The neighbor said Karen was trying to get them to condemn me for discriminatory party invitations and stealing her fence, but the group said they had no authority over private events or boundary disputes. Karen left that informal meeting in a huff, leaving everyone confused. This situation made me realize how bizarre it is when someone imposes their entitlement where it doesn't belong. Karen arrives in a peaceful community that respects each other's space and property, demanding equal treatment in private matters, ignoring property lines, and misusing emergency services. Unfortunately, Karen often causes these issues, but refuses to take responsibility. She could have avoided this spectacle by accepting that my birthday party was for friends, or calmly negotiating the fence issue. Karen kept a low profile after the fence removal. Her car passed by, but she never looked at me. She was probably embarrassed or realized she had no allies for her misguided crusades. The neighbor down the street told me Karen listed her house. That could be due to the fence drama, the citation, or community dissatisfaction. I'll miss her disruptions, but not pretend. I occasionally thought about the day she moved in and how I tried to welcome her with strawberries, imagining a friendly, neighborly relationship. Strange how things can go wrong. The final note was noteworthy. Several weeks after the fence removal, Karen's attorney wrote to me that Karen was considering legal action for emotional distress caused by my hostile exclusion from my birthday party and for theft of her fence. I had to pay Karen for the value of her fence and her pain and suffering, or it would sue me. It was bluster, according to my attorney. The letter was invalid because we meticulously documented the property lines, time-stamped photos, and notices we gave her. My lawyer refuted every claim and highlighted the evidence. We heard nothing and nothing happened. It was probably a last-ditch intimidation attempt, but by then, I wasn't scared. Karen dialed 911 at my party and fled when she realized what she'd done, demonstrating unchecked entitlement. She tried to force her way onto my property, but when that failed, she used emergency services. That was her big mistake because it started a chain of events that showed her disregard for others' rights. She was cited, lost her neighborhood reputation, and sued over a fence she installed improperly. She might have been able to keep me at a distance and be polite if she hadn't called 911 over something so minor. Instead, she sealed her community disgrace. This taught me that you must set boundaries early on, both literally and figuratively. If I had made Karen move her fence when I found it over the line, she might have realized I wasn't someone she could push around. Perhaps it would have escalated anyway. Karen seems to be one of those people who can't take no. Now that I host events, I'm more selective about who I tell and gently remind my guests not to spread the word. Whether that makes me seem cold, so be it. I must maintain my tranquility. Since the dispute was resolved, farmhouse life has resumed. On my side, I installed a sturdy metal fence that surrounds the orchard. Just in case, I added a main driveway-facing security camera. Michael remains friendly and neighborly. He sometimes brings fresh produce from his garden, and we talk about the orchard or local events. Our community remains supportive, and Karen's situation reminded us to look out for each other. We watch out for suspicious behavior, but respect each other's property and privacy. I caught glimpses of Karen's expression sometimes when she drove by, a mix of frustration and sadness. She didn't wave or roll down her window to yell at me. She probably realized how much she alienated everyone. Living in a community without trust or respect is hard. Her yard sign became for sale, and I heard a buyer did a walkthrough. The outcome is unknown, so I don't dwell on it. The new person we get if she leaves should be easier to get along with. Ironic that a birthday party started such a massive chain of events. In retrospect, Karen's 911 call was pivotal. She risked consequences by involving authorities. She tried to escape them that night, but accountability is unavoidable. Her actions caused the fine, fence removal, and neighborhood unrest. She planted and harvested. I'm no saint. Perhaps I could have been more diplomatic. Diplomacy is less important when someone calls 911 because they were denied entry to a private party. At that point, you must defend your home, rights, and peace. I would advise anyone in a similar situation to document everything, stay calm, and stand up for themselves legally. Karen enjoys confusing and intimidating others. The best remedy is clarity and consistency. After reflecting on the debacle, I realize it changed my view of neighborliness. I still like my neighbors, but I'm more cautious. I don't want to assume the worst of people, but I learned that a pleasant facade can hide entitlement. I prefer early red flag detection to months of property line disputes and frivolous 911 calls. If someone breaks into my life or property again, I know how to handle it. The upside is that I became more determined to protect my property. Another unexpected benefit was that a few neighbors I only knew briefly supported me. I got moral support and boundary fence help. Some recounted Karen's confrontational behavior. Karen would walk her dog off-leash into neighbors' yards without permission, according to one neighbor. Another said Karen chastised a neighbor's teenage son for playing music on his porch. I realized my situation wasn't unique. Karen had never called the police before. Our community came together in relief that Karen's behavior finally had consequences. After that, I spent my mornings tending to the orchard, afternoons at work, and weekends doing small home improvements. My farmhouse feels cozier, and the orchard looks better than in years. Sometimes you need a shake-up to appreciate your stability. That's my perspective. Karen disrupted me, but she made me set emotional and physical boundaries. I now own my home more. For years, my family has owned this land, and I've improved at defending it. Karen may move closer to her family, I heard. She reportedly wants a more modern neighborhood with all the amenities she wants. I hope whoever moves into her current property respects the rural charm and the unspoken rules we follow here. Mind your business, respect property lines, and be helpful. Not that hard. Some people, like Karen, see every boundary as a barrier to their desires. In conclusion, Karen's mishap taught me to defend property rights. It reinforced my belief that the law, while imperfect, can work in your favor if you follow it and are patient. The day she called 911 about a private birthday party sealed her fate in our neighborhood. She thought she could manipulate the authorities, but she forgot that the law protects everyone, including the property owner hosting a legal private gathering. After realizing her call was frivolous, authorities punished her. I sometimes laugh at the irony of someone who would call 911 to demand entry to a party, only to flee when they realized the real-world consequences. It happened exactly that way. What follows is history, with twists and turns, fence disputes, and resolutions that make for a wild story. I'm grateful for my friends and neighbors, the professionals who helped clear the air, and good old-fashioned common sense that prevailed. My birthday wasn't perfect, but it taught me social and territorial boundaries. Karen should learn from this if she ever crosses someone else's property lines. Friends, thank you. See you soon.